Good morning, everyone. This is Rabbi Daniel Sher teaching for Rabbi Amy Bernstein. Does anyone know what Torah portion we are in this week? Yes, Rachel.
Isn't it Tavo?
It is. And that wasn't just so I could make sure I prepped the right thing. I wanted to make sure that we were keeping track of this pace of study, because what is happening in the following weeks is we are finishing through with our Deuteronomy. Tavo is an important piece of this as we now continue down the unraveling of blessings and curses, and the notion of how we are to put a framework together of, instead of first person experience, what it means to have a tradition based on second person experience, right? We're no longer the Israelites experiencing each part of this text, but what it's going to be the next generation and beyond reading and learning and extracting from this story. And so Tavo is an important piece of starting that conversation, transitioning all the way through until we get to Simchat Torah. We rewind and we tell the story again. And that's an important piece that we'll kind of gravitate towards at the end is what it means to rewind and tell a story again. But what I want to kind of look at a little bit is that we have in Tavo stark contrast of Torah. Right? We have Deuteronomy 28, 114, the 14 verses of blessings. And then we have 28, 15 through 68, which is 50 verses of curses. So if I wanted a nice little setup for an iyun or a chance for us to reflect on Friday night, I would say, is this striking unbalance something you're uncomfortable with? Why are blessings so brief and curses so overwhelming? So before we even get into it, I want some gut reactions. Why does our tradition give us 3x the amount of curses as blessings in this week's Torah portion? You don't need to raise hands. You can just unmute and this is the Torah octagon. Let's just go.
It may just be because people we have a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer HaTov, and we tend a lot to do bad stuff. So we need a lot more warnings, and also the curses escalate, which I think.
Okay. So there's two different pieces. One, it's like when we're kids, we're going to get in trouble more than we're not going to get in trouble. So we need this imbalance. And two, actually, the writers of our text are careful with the kind of pattern of growth and ramping up of the curses so that maybe we don't get into the shocking ones first. Though, Bert, I will point out, we see the same thing in our blessings. The blessings start much smaller as well. There's a similar kind of ramp up in our blessings. But I do think you may be right that there's less on the line in that ramp up.
I was also going to say, but I think you'll get into this, in the curses, there's chances for teshuva at every step, which is an interesting thing considering we're right before the High Holy Days. If I recall properly, there's a blessing, a curse, and then if still you don't listen, there's another curse. So there's a lot of opportunities to change one's ways.
Yeah, it's why as a parent, I try not to say, if you don't do this, and then give them the exact punishment, if it's a punishment that I'm not ready for. Instead, I try to tiptoe towards the punishment, right? There's a similar piece to that. Okay, yeah. Who else thinks they have a reason for the imbalance between curse and blessing? Okay, well, I'll tell you.
I think you learn more when you're in a difficult situation than when you're in an easy situation.
Okay, the growth of trials and tribulation. Though I do think there is something to be said about that. I do also think there's something to be said about positive learning versus negative learning. And at times curses come with the pressure that for some actually enhance their chance to learn, and others it really actually deconstructs their spaces of learning, right? Like we got to be really careful with that. Okay.
Is it the curse piece sort of to wake us up? It's like to be attuned, because if there's not something in a sense that's keeping us on our toes, then we can become complacent.
I love this too. It makes me think my alarm clock is actually an Apple Watch. Now that's partially because I wake up earlier than my beloved wife, and I'm not interested in waking her up in the morning before she's woken.
It's very considerate.
So my watch vibrates, but her alarm clock actually kind of shines a light that grows over 10 minutes and a sound that grows over 10 minutes. And it's called, from this company called Hatch. And it basically is supposed to, in a mellow manner, bring you to a state of awake. And it does not work on me at all. If I don't have an alarm and that thing goes off, I will sleep right through it. There is no such thing as a delicate alarm clock for me. For other people, they wake up and they're refreshed from that. So again, yes, this is another really interesting way of looking at it, of like this kind of delicate waking up versus this abrupt wake up call. Though, by the way, in our tradition, our number one wake up call is the shofar, and there's nothing delicate about the blast of the shofar. Though I do agree with some of this input. Yeah.
So then we pay more attention to the curses than we do to the blessings.
Okay.
Because we're all familiar with what we do right, but sometimes we need to have it pointed out to us that we're not always doing the right thing.
And on top of it, this notion of like some people have a hard time hearing compliments about themselves, but those same people don't really love hearing negative feedback either. Like I'm like, oh, I don't hear you say nice things about me, but when you say not nice things, let's do it on this way instead.
Yeah.
Which is very funny. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to be said about that as well. So here's,
I just also keep thinking about the world that they lived in, which seems to me like there was probably, I imagine, just a lot more danger around every corner.
Yeah.
And so doesn't it seem like there's
physical danger.
Physical, like, right. So, because if you look at like what the punishments are for if you do that, right? So that giving them a sense of control, right? Because if everything seems out of your control, right, then thinking, well, if my behavior somehow, even like no one's going to see that I've done this, but God will. So maybe that'll prevent these horrible things from happening to me that I know are around every corner, because like war is just a fact of life and it's happening all the time. And it's so that like, because there aren't a whole lot of blessings happening all the time, but there are a whole lot of curses happening all the time.
Yeah. Totally. And what's changed?
Well,
I was going to say that
okay.
It's an interesting piece of it, is that it's different dangers. Today we have different sociological dangers involved. And as well, there's a lot of people who want to go back to the good old, I mean, there's diets based on caveman eating, right? Like there's always been this different, like, there will always be a balance of those blessings and curses in our lives. And I think one of the pieces we're kind of circling around is like, maybe what's changed is what some of those curses might be, but there's also always going to be this imbalanced balance. And part of that is because, do we need that same amount? So let's look at this. Each of these blessings is short and simple: family, food, security, livelihood, abundance. They're concise, like seeds of possibility, right? Like that's what we're really looking at, is like, this is a seed of possibility. This is a kernel of excitement. This is a potential of what can grow. And then the curses, by contrast, are sprawling and detailed. Why? Many of the reasons that you just named. And that imbalance, it kind of mirrors life as well, right? Joy and blessings are often simple and clear, whole, while pain and fear or anxiety is sprawling with complexity. And that is part of the way in which we enjoy each of those things. I'm not saying that joy isn't complex, but the complex parts of joy generally are the moments in which we work hard for the joy that we contain or that we keep. That's not what we're talking about. The moments of laughter, the moments of relaxation, the feeling of being in community. When I am with the community in a moment, even of it rooted from pain, the feeling of belonging and being around others is simple. You just feel the belonging. Explaining it might be complicated, but experiencing it isn't. You know it when you experience it. It is flooded over you, and you know it to be true. So what would it mean if we each set a daily intention? Let's just start with this, of naming 14 blessings in our lives per day. And the reason I ask you this is you all recognize the imbalance of 14 blessings versus 50 or so verses of curses, but 14 is a lot of blessings. If I'm being realistic, if I have a busy day Have I stopped and recognized 14 blessings? Have I stopped and experienced 14 individual moments? No, I'm shooting for like 4 or 5. I'm shooting for my coffee being hot by the time I drink it because my kids were getting ready on time instead of running around like chickens with their heads cut off. That's blessing number 1. I'm already 2 hours awake by the time I figure out if that thing's working or not. You have a couple of meetings, a couple of things going on, maybe a couple of stressful moments, maybe you get stuck in traffic or like whatever. There's a chance for a lot more stumbling to happen in your day. And if everything went right, did you even have 14 blessings in your day? I'm not saying that your life can't be filled with joy, but 14 is a pretty good number.
Mm-hmm.
That means all of my meals went exactly as I wanted them. I had a chance to walk, to breathe, to pause. My kids didn't fight with each other. Nothing went wrong at work. Not a single traffic incident happened. I didn't accidentally hurt my lower back bending down to pick something up. I didn't miss another call from SBA or FEMA based on things going on. Everything would have to go right, and maybe I will hit 14 blessings. And the rabbis know this challenge. They tell you to try to get 100 blessings, a challenge that I think is supposed to be like running on a hamster wheel. But before we even get too far into the imbalance, I think the first thing we have to ask is 14 enough? Because if it is, like, should we even be so concerned with the imbalance? Maybe it was enough blessing to motivate and drive and direct us. We always compare the imbalance, but do we start by saying, is this enough? Yeah, Bert.
I was going to say, you were talking about the 100 blessings. Part of it is being sensitive to what we're blessed with.
Okay.
So I think that's what the system of blessings from the rabbis are all about. I mean, that you wake up, you're supposed to say morning blessings, you're supposed to be thankful that you have clothes, that you can eat, that your body works, that you breathe. When you eat, you're supposed to say a blessing before you eat, after you eat. And so if we wait for blessings to hit us over the head, yeah, we're going to have trouble realizing what the blessings are. But I think the Jewish way is to look for the blessings and see the thousands or the 1,000, however many it is, of small blessings that there are every day.
Yeah, no, I think that's really fair.
Yeah.
Alex. And then David as well.
David. Yeah. So I was thinking along the same lines as Bert. It depends how you define a blessing. And, one could define a blessing as every moment that we get to be alive and be sentient and enjoy all the wonderful things around us at any given moment. And so 14 blessings isn't enough, because I like to think that we have hundreds of blessings every day. It doesn't have to be as monumental as having had a good lunch. It can be just looking out the window of my office on Wilshire and seeing the fog hanging over Santa Monica and appreciating sort of what this moment in time is like and being alive to experience it.
No, we're getting into some of the definitional pieces of how we can understand it and parse this out. Alex, and then tomorrow.
Just to continue that thought again, yeah, how do you define a blessing? And what sometimes might seem like a curse can ultimately be a blessing. So how do we differentiate? What is this definition of a blessing, and is it different for each person? And then also, how intentionally are you doing the blessing? Because it's really easy to say a blessing or perform a blessing, but you're not really doing it intentionally. You're doing it because it's obligatory in some ways, or it's ritual.
Well, let's not tell people how easy it is to perform blessings, all right? I like my job.
So I'm curious. I'm just curious about that, but really, yeah, this notion of like sometimes blessings, what might seem like a blessing is a curse, and what might seem like a curse is a blessing. So.
Okay, that's another intention way to look at it. Yeah.
That's interesting. I was going to add to the what a lot of people are saying here, I think if we really think about our blessings, we've got our eyes, our nose, our ears, every cell in our body, every hair follicle, there's tens and tens of thousands of blessings every second of every day. We've got every second, we've got every breath that we take. I think someone mentioned that. There's just endless blessings. At the same time, we don't always know the consequences of things. Like we could be so lost in our blessings that we might not know some of the consequences, and perhaps laying out so many consequences are because they can be such different things, blessings and curses, blessings and consequences.
I think that also part of if you want, the magic of the Jewish system of blessings is if you get into the habit of saying blessings, then you also can be in the habit of listening to the blessings you're saying. So when you wake up in the morning, if you say Modeh or Modah Ani Lefanecha, if you thank God just for being alive, for coming back from sleep, some days that's just rote and you don't pay attention to it, and other days there's a lot more sensitivity to it. And the blessing doesn't talk to God, but the blessing talks to you. And the same thing, whether it be food, whether it be the functioning of the body. And part of the whole idea, now we're talking about something different than blessings and curses. We're talking about Jewish blessings, is to constantly sensitize us to the miracle of living and to create thankfulness in us.
Any thoughts to that? Yeah, Pam.
I heard like a story, a metaphor for this parsha in terms of why so many more curses than blessings. And it gave an example of a mother telling her child to look both ways before he crosses the street. And then the kid's out there playing outside and the ball goes into the street, and without thinking, he runs into the street. And at that exact moment, a car is speeding around the corner heading right towards him. And the mom is seeing this, and people on the street are seeing this. And the car then narrowly avoids him, and the kid is okay. Well, the people on the street are relieved, but what's the mama's reaction? Her reaction is to go and get this kid and yell at him and maybe shake him, and maybe give him a potch and send him to his room. Now, all hell is falling on this kid because he almost died not listening to his mom. And so this comes because no one loves him more than his mother. And the metaphor is that God has given us, has told us basically, look both ways before you cross the street. And when we don't do that, this is the consequence.
I think that there is a big piece of that in this, is like, if we're not thinking about all the different potential consequences, then what we are doing is we're not being vigilant enough about our surroundings, which will eventually end up with less opportunities of blessing. I want to shift a little bit based on part of this idea of all the different parts of our body and every single muscle and all the pieces. There was this fallacy, I hate to break it to anyone who's been taught this and thought it's not a fallacy, that it takes less muscles to smile than to frown, right? I learned it the other way. It takes more muscles to smile than to frown. So if you're looking to burn some extra calories, just stay happy, because it's harder, right? But that's part of this. It's harder to smile all day. There's another version to look at that, which is crying versus laughter. What do you think takes more calories, takes more energy for your body? I'm not worried about having a snack. I mean, which one measurable energy in your body?
I bet laughter.
Laughter takes a considerable amount more energy than crying. Crying is heavy and it can be draining. It often leaves us entirely exhausted. I mean, I will never forget the feeling of fatigue and exhaustion the entire month of January 2025. I will never forget the level of full exhaustion, like I ran a marathon every day. But the truth is, I actually was not outputting very much energy at all, but it was exhausting and mentally draining. Laughter is energizing. Laughter is rejuvenating, and yet it actually takes more energy to do it. There's an interesting thought here about what it actually means to be finding this balance. Also, while we're on it, tangent number 7, I would never wish upon anyone what many people in our community have gone through this last. I also believe it has formidably changed me as a rabbi and changed me as a father and changed my perspective and the way I can both relate to others, advocate for others in their moment of highest need. It has forever been a blessing on how I can help the world, but I certainly will never and cannot categorize it as a blessing. This is where it gets blurry. Laughter is not always pure joy. Dark humor has been one of the most important coping mechanisms for me and for my family through much of what we're talking about. A chuckle in the middle of some grief, that's in balance too, but it's holy. At every funeral that I've ever led, laughter is an important aspect. You don't laugh through it, the whole thing, but a chance to laugh and chuckle during the reflection of the imprint that one leaves in this world is sacred. And there's an imbalance to it, and there's a messiness to it, and there's a complication to it. But a small moment of laughter can tilt the scales amidst much pain and be the calibration to keep going. I do believe there is an imbalance in this world. We are going to approach more curses than we do blessings throughout our. Yes, there is a reframe, and I don't want to take that away from anyone. You can reframe as many blessings as you want. You will have a life full of more challenges and trials than you do of auto blessings, but the blessings have a heavier weight to them. Otherwise, it wouldn't work to work all day. But playing with my kids for an hour might be what I need. Except for, by the way, my wife's teaching them Monopoly, and I don't know if that's a curse or a blessing yet. We're going to find out. But the idea of playing board games with our kids, I've got to play with them a fraction of the amount that we work. But it's a balance.
Rabbi, Mark tells...
For 2 weeks with my kids, I'm going to be ready to go back to work, by the way. So there's a balance to that too. Yes.
Mark tells a wonderful story about the father who sits his kids down at the table and the dessert is spread in front of them. And he said, all right, nobody gets a bite of dinner until you finish your dessert. Talk about a balance.
You know, I watched a video recently where a mom dumps an entire pot of spaghetti and meatballs on the table. She covers it with tinfoil. The kids don't know why. And she dumps the whole thing in the middle of the table and hands them 4 forks. And they look at her like she's nuts. And she says, eat it. And eventually it gets to like, you were complaining about using your plate and your fork anyways. So tonight's dinner is just on the table, right? Like we need a balance. We need these moments. We need to be able to find that. But part of what's so important here, part of what I think Tavo is going to be saying to us over and over again is like, don't be fooled by the number. Right. Balance isn't about mirroring. Balance isn't about the equation being 1-to-1.
Right.
Balance is about the potency. The simplicity of those 14 blessings packs a different punch. And I bet the kid who gets to eat dessert first, listen, we all have those in our back pocket. So we'll go do that. We'll just blow the kid's mind for the day.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
There's a few things that you said. So this is kind of 2-part. And sorry, I know I've contributed a lot.
No, don't be sorry. I also don't speak in a linear fashion. I'm shocked it's only 2 things.
Love tangential. So tangential fashion, stream of consciousness is good. So the first is like what you were saying is, well, my personal opinion is I feel like so much of this study is like the power of narrative and looking at these stories over and over again, or, Torah over and over again. But what you were saying is this experience the past year has cracked you open in ways that you weren't before, right? And so as humans, like, I know that I remember I had friends that experienced significant anxiety, and it was really hard. Like I felt bad, but it was really hard for me to relate and to understand the depths because I hadn't experienced it until I did. And that's just something, one little thing. But when people are suffering, and if you haven't experienced it, you can understand their suffering, but it's different when you have gone through something. And I guess my question is, like, can we fully understand? Sorry, I'm on Sunset, but can we fully understand the depth of people's experience or their curses unless we've gone through it ourselves? And then the second part of my question is this idea that, how do I say this? Like, who's conditioning, or maybe it's my personal own, but so much of Judaism is the insignificance of remembrance again, and deconstructing these stories. But why have I been conditioned and to like think that things should always be blessings, or like, is it an Americanized, or there's some conditioning of like that we should always be happy, or that we should, like, life is it. I don't know if it's a privilege thing. I don't know. But does this resonate with anyone? I feel like I was conditioned to think that like life should be way more happiness than it is challenge.
I don't know that you were conditioned for that. You were conditioned to strive for it. Because if I told you that life could now be a vacation, at some point you would tell me you need more structure and you need more balance. When I go on, I'm telling you, if I went to a tropical beach for an entire week, day 4, Jen would be like, go do what you need to do. I know this is torture to you. But the first 3 days are really good and they're a balance I need. We were conditioned to strive for it. But then we were all ready to, yes, you're expecting life to be a blessing, but life has work and trials and tribulation, and you don't feel like you were swindled for it. So you always knew that these things come in a balance, but we drive for one direction over another. And that might be okay in this too. And I want to go back one step to the first part you said. I often think about the kids. I was very good at math and science. I wasn't very good with language, and for years didn't feel comfortable sharing my own writing for it. It's a whole nother tangent for another day. And other people, my wife, for instance, was fabulous with language when it came to writing and grammar. Some people have a very difficult time with weight because they gain weight. Other people have a very difficult time with weight because they can never put on enough weight. Some people, like, there's any of the things you bring up, there's a balance to, right? There's the people who worry on one side or the other for weight, the people who are great at math and not good at reading, the people who can eat books for breakfast, and the other side, right? Like, there is always going to be what you experience. Half of the people are going to be like, I can't relate to it. So what we have to do instead is create mechanisms so that we can relate to people even when we can't relate to the specific circumstance. And the last part that you were hinting towards, I think, is a really important thing to be looking at, is what might be recognized as a curse may later be a tool in the toolbox of achieving blessing. And that's an important piece of this too. The curse might be something to walk towards a blessing later. In fact, in our text, they certainly are. And there's a piece of Pirkei Avot, a piece of Mishnah, and it says, be careful with a light mitzvah as with a weighted one. Do you understand what they're saying by a light one versus a weighted one? The rabbis are saying some mitzvot are very easy to achieve, some mitzvot are very complicated to achieve. And the rabbis say, be as cautious and careful and intentional with a light mitzvah as you do with a heavy one, for you don't know the reward of the mitzvah. What are they saying? Even a small mitzvah can sometimes outweigh great challenge. And similarly, we don't need as many blessings as curses to live a meaningful and balanced life, because sometimes the little things end up carrying the greater weight. And so what we have to do is not downplay or dismiss even the lightest of blessings, because they are going to be part of our counterbalance. Think about it. Have you ever experienced a small blessing or deed that outweighed something much heavier? I can think of so many. And I can think of so many small moments of love or generosity that have pulled me out of something much heavier and difficult. I think that this is the balance that Ki Tavo is trying to point out. If you really try to make it reciprocal, it's not going to work. But if you recognize that this is each based on the potency and the experience, then it can. And there's another example of this. There's a great story from Rabbi Akiva. Gam Zula Tova, right? Rabbi Akiva, he loses his lamp, his rooster, and his donkey. Curse after curse. This guy cannot catch a break. And then what happens with this? So I'll tell you a little bit about the story and how it kind of fully fits in. Rabbi Akiva was once traveling with his donkey and his rooster and his lamp. Mind you, you know he's going to lose them. He came into town seeking lodging, but no one would take him. And he said, everything God does is for good. He's still okay with it. That night, his lamp blew out, his rooster was eaten by a cat, and his donkey was attacked by a lion. And again, Rabbi Akiva says, everything God does is for good. Now, pause in the story. Don't you hate this optimist? Isn't it difficult when you listen to the person who literally just had everything taken away and says, everything God does is for good? The next morning, he discovers that bandits had attacked the town. And if his lamp had been burning, or his rooster or donkey had made noise, the bandits would have discovered him too and stolen the rest of his belongings. So even though I'm annoyed by it, in this moment, Rabbi Akiva turns around and says, everything God does is for good. Now, part of that is the notion of perspective. Part of that is that it parallels this teaching of Ki Tavo. The curses are many and they're detailed and they're exhausting. The lamp is out, the rooster's gone, the donkey's gone, the rejection from the town, but the blessing, it doesn't need to match. One blessing, one survival, and it tips the scales of all of the loss. Finding a balanced list is a perspective and a condition that is going to be wasted. Finding a balanced experience is the other piece of it. Yeah, Bert.
I was going to say, I think that Rabbi Akiva's attitude is hard to accept in a post-Holocaust world. And so maybe I would say whatever happens, happens. It is what it is. I think at one point Moses asked God, what's your name? And God says, I will be what I will be, and it is what it is. But I'm not sure that everything that happens is for the good. I just can't. I just can't see any good in the Holocaust. So anyhow, I'm not. I understand where you're coming from, and I think we can find the good, as you're saying. We can find the blessing in what appear to be curses. But I think there are some things that are so terrible. And I'm not sure that God does those things, but they're things that humans do.
Now we're into a totally different tangent of this, which is I'm not sure that God is going to be the one that's giving all these curses. And it'll be another piece, Bert. I think you've heard me say this. I know many of you have, because I've said this on repeat so many times since January, I can't even count. I am not a person that believes in bad things happening for a reason. I don't believe our philosophy of Judaism does either. And before you say, wait, Rabbi, this is literally what we're studying. Yeah. And like last week, we studied that you're supposed to stone your children if they're disrespectful. And the rabbis in the Talmud say, hey, by the way, this never happened.
Good.
Which is really important to remember. We're a living, breathing, evolving tradition. It's okay for us to stop and say, no. Right? There's multiple wives in the Torah. Slavery is approved in the Torah. We're not still doing it. Why? Because we evolve. But here's what I will say about the curses piece. The way I understand it, Bert, is that we don't waste tragedy. Therefore, any curse, any tragedy that happens, we can take part of it and make it a building block of blessing. It doesn't mean it had to happen, but it did happen. Example. The temple is destroyed. The Talmud is created. The Holocaust happens. The state of Israel is given an extra opportunity to survive, to be created. I'm not going to say the state of Israel happened because of the Holocaust, because it didn't. Check your history books. It starts in the 1800s, right? But it certainly gave it part of that push when it came to world approval at the end of, in the 40s. You had Holocaust museums and notions of tolerance spring around the world. Yes, we're in a complicated moment again right now, but a lot of blessings for the world took a building block from the tragedy of the Holocaust and started to build towards blessing. So I won't say that the curses had to happen. I agree with you. I won't go anywhere near they had to happen, but we don't waste them once they happen. And we can take part from them and build towards the blessings in our lives. And the people who want to get rid of them, break them down, and throw them out with the trash are throwing away the very building blocks and materials and resources we need to build about the blessings in our lives. We cannot waste tragedy. We cannot waste those curses, right? That is where we're going with it. Yeah, Betsy.
I just wanted to say that when you were talking about the significance of small blessings, like that has really been brought home to me in a big way since the fire, because basically that's what has gotten us through. Like that was a major traumatic event, but there have been so many small blessings that it sort of overshadows the original trauma. I mean, I wrote an essay, finally was able to write an essay about it, and it all has to do with silver linings. I mean, I know that, just like with the Holocaust, there's not really, I can't really say, oh, God made that happen and, for a reason. I mean, I'm not going to say.
And I don't need you to, ever.
Yeah.
Ever. I will never be that rabbi. I do not think it happens for those reasons. I just believe that we build from it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, my wardrobe is less complicated now. My stuff is more organized, and in part because there's less of it. And you could say, well, Rabbi, you could have gone through and purged. Want to bet? I've been talking about it for years.
Right.
I couldn't do it.
It's one of those silver linings. But I mean, I was thinking more in terms of just the generosity of little things by people, companies, organizations, but particularly by friends, just like the things that they've given us that were so meaningful that, like, one friend took her painting off her wall that's been hanging there for 30 years and gave it to us because we had the same painting that burned up. I mean, things like that are just, it's not like I'm going to say, well, it was all worthwhile, but it definitely lessens the pain of the loss, just seeing all these blessings, all these small blessings.
Tavo reminds us that we don't need an ego, that what we need to do is we need to have the tools. We need to recognize it. Those small blessings you're talking about, Betsy, they're potent, they're powerful. They don't come close to the devastation. They just don't. On the list, they're just not the same magnitude, but they're so potent that at some point they start to fill the cup enough that we're able to really, we're not yet at thrive, but we're not going to not get back to thrive. We're going to get back to thriving. And so blessings may be fewer, but they're stronger. One mitzvah, one laugh, one act of kindness. I'm telling you, I told someone recently, I love doing weddings. I love doing bar and bat mitzvahs. Brisses aren't my favorite, but the baby naming part's pretty good. But funerals are the most sacred part, because all those other moments, people know what they want. You talk to a wedding couple, sometimes they tell the rabbi a wild amount of what they want. And I'm like, what am I even doing here? I still do it. But because I want, but in a funeral, you have an opportunity to help people discover a need that they can't verbalize, or begin a process of healing that they can't imagine. And often it comes from nothing more than what they call online a dad joke. It comes from a subpar, not super complex, straightforward joke or reminder of humor or, idiosyncrasy or nuance or quirk in the person. But that one spark of laughter in that moment creates a bit of balance and the opportunity to weather the weight and difficulty of the loss. Our task is not to count it evenly, but to notice and honor the blessings and recognize that even if they present as small, they have the power to tip the scales. So the way we interact in our community, the way we interact with others, has the same notion. When we say umetuka for our sweet ear, it's not just because we want everyone to have a little more sugar. It's because if we bring sweetness and love into the space, then we will make the community's new year sweeter. You all have the power to do it. And your resources to do it might be smaller than your resources for kvetching and for complaining and for being bothered and for the woes in the world. And you don't need as many. You can make a profound impact with the ones you have. And this is part of that lesson. Yeah, Rachel.
What you just said about they're not having to be like, they don't have to be equal in order to find balance. That struck me as very, very profound. And I had a sort of eureka moment. It reminded me of something I heard on a podcast this week. The podcast is called Identity Crisis. It's through the Hartman Institute. Rabbi Amy Bernstein had actually mentioned it one time on during a Torah study, and so I started listening to some of them. But they were talking about a different topic. I mean, and the topic was political, but it made me think the same thing, because at the beginning, the speaker started talking about marriage and how marriage works through compromise. But that in a marriage, very often, there might be two, so, you've got two partners, and maybe one person sometimes compromises more than the other, but they both are doing it because they agree that the thing they're doing it for is more valuable than being on their own and not having the marriage. So it's unequal. It might be unequal, but they don't care, because if one person is giving more, or sometimes one person, or for a period of time, one person gives more than the other, it's okay because it's for this greater thing. And so when you were talking about, I don't know, so it's this idea that things can be unequal, and yet, you see, in our minds, we feel like they have to be equal in order for it to, like, things to make sense, but they don't. You're right. You actually can get to the balance, or you can get to the center, the place where there's balance and where things work, without them being equal.
I'll go one step further as we wrap up our study and have a chance to say blessings together. You don't want a balanced and perfect life. That's boring and artificial. What we want are the tools and resources to experience all the joy we can in an imbalanced and imperfect life. Because imbalance and imperfection leave space for growth. And growth is one of the ways that we experience those celebrations and those moments of joy and have something to work forward to. We are designed to thrive in imbalance and imperfection. Mm-hmm. And the greatest threat to me would be to offer me a perfectly balanced and a perfectly perfect life, because I like puzzles and I like to be a part of working towards solutions, and people come together when they're working towards greater good. And that's why we do Tikkun Olam, and it's why we try to heal the world around us, and it's why we do all these pieces. So the blessing from my perspective of Ki Tavo is that we are going to keep trying to balance the scales, because what's perfect about our experience is the imperfection and imbalance of our lives. It gives us something to be working towards. It gives us drive to find community. And with community, we find one another, and we find those moments that we said way back at the beginning of this, where you may not be able to write it, but the minute you experience something like the power of community, it immediately washes over you, and you know that you found the thing you're seeking. It's instantaneous when it happens. It's a moment of balance and of pause, and it's what we seek. And that's why we come together, and that's why we study, and that's why that imbalance is exactly what it is that we need in our tradition.